All right, welcome everybody. My name's Kirsty Foster. I'm head of engagement here at Conservation Careers, and I'd love to welcome you to this month's webinar, which is all about women in conservation. So it's probably no surprise to you that the majority of our audience here at Conservation Careers are women, about 60% or a little more. And despite the fact that this webinar is focused on women specifically, it's actually been our most popular webinar yet that we've ever run. So we've had about 1,300 people register, which is amazing. But this is the first time we've actually run a live event specifically focused on women. So I just want to start by thanking all of the women out there from around the globe who've joined us today. And I really want to extend a warm welcome to our two special guests today, and they're Kirsty Crawford and Laura Cuppage, and they're both from And Another Thing. So that's an online platform which is an honest place to talk about conservation issues. So a very warm welcome today. We're thrilled to have you here. And because we've had so many people sign up for this webinar, I just want to take a moment to let people join. Some people will be joining on Zoom, others will be joining where we're broadcasting on YouTube. And we thought we might start with a poll. So I'm going to launch a poll here with the question, what do you see as the biggest barrier or barriers for women in conservation? So here we go. You should see the poll come up on your screen. So just take a moment. You can select one response, you can select multiple responses, whatever you feel represents the biggest barriers for women. And if there's something that you think of that isn't on that list, there's an option for other, and you're welcome, if you'd like, to share that in the chat as well. Great, so I'll just give you another, got about half of you who've completed, which is fantastic. Okay, and we're starting to see some themes coming out. I'll just give it another second or two here so you can finish. This also helps us know a bit better where we can focus more on today's discussion, where we can spend the most time. All right, so we've had about 90% of people vote. I'm just going to end it there, and I'm going to share the results so that you can see them. So this is kind of what we predicted. We were just having a chat now. And we thought that self-sabotage and imposter syndrome might be the main issues. So that's interesting to see that's come out, getting close to 70% of people. But other big issues that you've identified are inequality, cultural norms as well. And then poor careers advice, which is fair enough, something that runs through conservation in general. And obviously that's what we're trying to do through conservation careers and support, and something we've probably all experienced in our careers too. Okay, really interesting, really useful for us to know where to spend most time also in today's chat. Okay, so I just like to start with some quick introductions before we get started. My name again is Kirsty Foster. I'm head of engagement here at Conservation Careers. And we help about 450,000 conservationists each year. And over half of them, about 60%, are women. So these are very passionate, bright, talented women from around the globe who are doing amazing work for our planet. And today we're here to talk about some of the unique barriers that women conservationists face and how we can help overcome them. And to do that, we have two very special guests today. They're Kirsty Crawford and Laura Cuppage of At Another Thing. So Kirsty, she currently works for an environmental charity in the UK as Senior Citizen Science Project Officer. So she helps deliver a host of nature and community-based wildlife programs in the UK. But she actually has a very diverse background, from things like journalism and performance, through to an MSc in wildlife biology and conservation. And something that I think is really neat is that she advocates for being more than one thing. Laura also comes from quite a diverse background, which includes design and art. And she actually entered conservation with ZSL, so the Zoological Society of London. And what I really like about her is that she reassures those who don't work currently in conservation that they can still be conservationists. So over a third of our audience at Conservation Careers are career switchers. So I think that's really interesting and relevant for a growing number of people who are shifting careers into conservation. So very warm welcome, Kirsty and Laura. It's great to have you here. And I'd love it if you guys could just take a moment to introduce yourselves.
Yeah, thank you. I'll introduce myself first, if that's all right. Yeah, so thanks so much for having us here. So yeah, my background's been really kind of diverse, like Kirsty mentioned, from journalism and now ending up delivering citizen science projects and working for a conservation organisation. And it's the road to this point which kind of inspired myself and Laura to start a new platform. So I've popped some links in the chat. You know, this is the brain power of both of us sitting in our living rooms night after night and plugging away, trying to reach the audience with questions and issues that we think are really important. It's things that have kind of really mattered to us. And from talking to a lot of you, we've had 6 or 7 sessions now. We've realised what matters to you as well. So, and another thing is really a safe space to talk about issues in conservation. But instead of, you know, just providing, we know there's platforms out there to provide workshops and events. And, you know, if we want to look at ecological issues and climate change issues, and yeah, that exists already. But what doesn't exist so much is how do you feel? How are you doing? What actually matters to you? And just having someone to listen to you. And we appreciate that family and friends, they sometimes don't get the whole conservation concept entirely. You know, what do you do? What do you actually work as? Do you have a real job? So we're targeting all of that. We realize that networking can be a bit awkward sometimes. So we want to allow you to meet people without having that network face on. So the links in the chat are to our website and also to our mailing list. So we have monthly resources and we have our event schedule for 2021, where we're going to be bringing you lots of kind of social events and workshops. And we're across on Instagram at And Another Place. So that's it from me. I'm sure I'll talk much more about our little platform and what it means to us and what we found out. But yeah, Laura, I'll pass over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Kirsty. So yeah, I joined Kirsty. She came to me, she was like, I've got this idea. We keep talking about all these issues in conservation. We can't be the only ones. And then that's where And Another Thing was born from. My background is in art. I did a textiles degree, so very different, but the natural world's always been a massive inspiration to me. And I did work in the conservation sector. I was a presenter with Kirsty at ZSL. But decided to leave that job and focus on using my art as a way to bring the natural world to everyone, and really, really encouraging people that even if you're not working in the conservation sector, you can still be a conservationist. You're all important to the fight for our planet. So everyone's as important as everyone. And that's what I wanted to bring to the platform that Kirsty and I run. So it's encouraging everyone and empowering everyone, whoever you are, whatever you do. If it's not your job, then you can still help save the planet. And it's more of a lifestyle rather than a career choice. It can be both, but you don't have to just go, right, I want to work in conservation to be a conservationist. I believe that you can be a conservationist whatever you do. So that's where I think Kirsty and I's passion and wanting to let everyone know that it's possible to help. That's why we set up that our platform, and hopefully really encourage others to know that there's other things out there. So my background being in art, I've decided to use that skill set to engage with people about the natural world in the hope that it inspires people to help and go forward and protect the planet as much as possible. So looking at different ways on how you can be a conservationist, and it's not just being in the conservation sector, if that makes sense.
Wonderful. Thanks so much to you both. I'm thrilled to have you here. That is so needed right now. And I think often we find that we get ourselves into thinking that, you know, other people come from better backgrounds, or they're more important, or they have more to offer, or their word counts for more. But really, we need all of the voices and all of us here working in conservation. So I think what you're doing is fantastic. Okay, so just a quick overview of what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about sort of four main themes, I guess. The first is what inequality issues women still face in conservation. Then what challenges and opportunities exist for women to balance their careers with family life. Then we're going to go into how might self-sabotage and imposter syndrome affect women in particular. And I think we'll probably spend most of our time there. And then lastly, we'll focus on the positives. You know, what opportunities are there for female role models, for leadership, for mentorship, all that good stuff. At the end, we're going to leave time for a Q&A. So we'll try and leave at least 15 minutes to have an open Q&A. So keep track of your questions that you have for Kirsty and for Laura. If you want to ask a question before we get to the Q&A, please put it in the Q&A box, not the chat, because we're going to be able to upvote questions. So we answer the most popular questions, basically, or the most common questions. So use the Q&A box, not the chat. And I think the last thing before we start the discussion is just to acknowledge that this webinar is a small part of a much bigger conversation. We can't and we're not going to try and cover all of the many complex issues that women in conservation face all over the world, particularly cultural norms that vary country to country. But Kirsty and Laura are going to share some of their personal experience working with women, which is fantastic. And I think we all hope this is just the beginning of a bigger and really important discussion. All right, so let's start with the first topic, which is what inequality issues do you guys think women in conservation still face today?
Do you want to take it, Laura? Do you want me to kick off?
You go for it, Kirsty, if you want, and then I can jump in.
Okay, for sure. Yeah, and just to reiterate, like, we are UK based through a kind of UK lens, and we definitely don't have all the answers, but hopefully we can help in a small way. So I think feedback from our platform has certainly been that the fact of being a woman and coupled with age, even if you're a young woman, sort of women in the mid-age bracket and older women, every stage and age coupled with the fact that you're a woman, you put those two together and there seems to be a lot more inequalities and barriers than if you were a man of the age spectrum as well. So we've had a lot of kind of personal stories from women about either being young and taken not seriously, or being too old and then also not taken seriously, or being just in the middle at that switch between an early career conservationist to mid-level, and maybe taking on some managerial responsibilities and feeling like you need to shout the loudest and be aggressive at the table, and that goes against almost your natural personality or what you really want to be doing. But maybe you can expand on that, Laura, because I know we spoke to a few women at length about how they were feeling to get their point across they had to work 10 times harder. But just before we kind of move on, I would say that there's definitely, in some areas, that outdoor work is perceived as a slightly more masculine job or pursuit, or is still very kind of male dominated. And even especially in academia, the kind of concept of the white old professor, as cliched as it is, but it is still there. And the fact that we had International Day of Women and Girls in Science just last week, the fact that we have international days of women in anything is, well, that speaks for itself. It was, I was kind of doing a bit of research, and it was 15 years ago that the president of Harvard, I made a little note of it, in his kind of inaugural speech suggested that women in science will never succeed because of genetic differences. So that was in 2005. So when that viewpoint was being floated around. But yeah, you don't need statistics from me. I think we all know and will all have experienced in a small way inequalities of a varying spectrum. But that is just a few. I don't know what you want to kind of add to that, Laura.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's something like you touched on, kind of the perspective of what's the norm in a way, and sometimes it's very subtle as well. It's like you were saying, the outside working environment and maybe like the heavy lifting kind of things, like the more physical things, I think there is still a little bit of persona around that, whose roles they are, if you know what I mean. So people will kind of perceive an outside role as a more male dominated role. This is kind of all stuff that we've had feedback from our platform. And touching on the age again, this was a really interesting point that was made when we were doing our Women in Conservation event through and another thing. We had the chat open and we saw that a lot of people were talking about their age. So there was, like Kirsty said, the complete flip of one lady put on that she felt like she really had to push to give her opinion and had to be really loud and almost a bit boisterous and aggressive just to get her point across, because she said she was quite petite, she was small and she looked young. Whereas other people in the room could just say how they felt without having to make such an effort to put their point across. And then that was responded by another lady who said that she felt the complete opposite, that she felt that she was too old, and that some of the jobs were maybe, again, going back to that physical, the physical side of it, that she was too old to be doing that kind of role, or it was too late for her to get into the conservation sector. So it was an interesting thing for us to see pop up, and I do think it's something that affects women because of, again, kind of the idea that if you're a younger woman or you look like a little girl, that you don't know what you're talking about. So this perception of the way someone looks can actually affect other people's opinion of you without even saying anything. And then that kind of led us on to thinking about and talking about the idea of, and I think we'll cover that a little bit in a moment, but the idea of, if you're a certain age, like for me, I'm 31, and I'm planning to have children at some point. And sometimes it does make me wonder that if I apply for a job, is that going to go in a slightly different way because of my age and the fact that I probably will be having children, and that, again, it all kind of like circles around age. And for men, I know we're not saying that there's not anything about, like, if a man looks younger and they might feel that way too, but I do still think that idea of a man of the same age would be treated slightly differently than a woman as well. So that the idea of age as a woman in the sector is quite interesting as well. I think that was one of the things that I picked up on when we were doing our event, Kirsty.
And I think also leading on to, choices to have families, again, a very different subject, a whole subject in itself. But if we focus on the avenue that you do choose, or you do have a family, then there was an issue of money coming up, which was intrinsically linked to being a woman, especially a single woman, a single parent family, career breaks, falling off the ladder, like people feeling that conservation was very fast paced and you needed to pick up new skill sets on the job as you went along for certain jobs, and a huge fear of taking that time away and feeling like you'd be irrelevant within a short period of time, which, again, we're not saying is the case. These are just people's personal perceptions. So we have to honour them and take them as they are. That fact did come up quite a few times. So that's playing on the small demographic that we were chatting to at the time. That was definitely playing on their mind, was linked to money and maternity pay and working for charities, like many of you will if you work in conservation, charity maternity conditions compared to if you worked for a government organisation. Just really touching the tip of the iceberg. But even for me, just throwaway comments are still prevalent, because sometimes I do think of the topic of women in conservation or women in anything as a whole and think, well, some certain things can almost sound tipping into like the cliche. But in my first year in conservation, the manager that I was meeting with to go out to site came into the room and then left And then so I had to kind of go get him, and he was like, I'm really sorry, I thought you were on high school placement, shouldn't. And I was like, no, me and you, we were working together for a week. And he was like, oh, all right. And just, you know, things like that just stunt your confidence ever so slightly.
And it's so like subtle, isn't it? It's not even maybe necessarily meant as a insult.
No, but it just makes you, for next time that you meet somebody, you know, if you're at the beginning of your career. And then again, it's like, women or not, you know, it could have been a young looking male, but this was just personal experience. The next time, was it even playing into silly things like me being like, well, I better put more makeup on, I better dress in a more mature manner. Like, this shouldn't be affecting, this has got nothing to do with conservation, but having these things where you meet people and they overlook you, or I don't know, you tell people you've been in your current role for 5 years and they're like, oh, I thought you just left school yesterday. Again, we're only talking about one aspect of it. And I am really conscious of not necessarily people being old, because it's all your own perception, but feeling like whatever age you are, you're too old to make a career switch. That really bothers me.
Or like you're too young, like, or you look too young. Like, it's almost like there's no actual point where you're gonna
there's no sort of ideal way to be, almost. But yeah, where I think we're gonna go for it.
Something that I was going to say, actually, we were discussing a personal thing that happened to me in terms of what I've experienced with inequality to do with my gender. It was a very bizarre situation, actually, but I'm going to put it out there because it really makes you think. So I went for a promotion in my previous job, and it was me and another candidate who was a male, so there was only 2 of us, and I was successful. I got the position, and it turned out that the other candidate was then saying the only reason I got the promotion was because I was a woman. Now, it just seemed completely bizarre to me, because usually it's almost like a switch in those gender dynamics, that he was saying that the only reason I got it was because I was a woman. It was so bizarre to me. And it was because the office at the time, there was 2 other women working in the office, so in his head he thought that he didn't get it because he was a male. And it just and that it was a really weird concept to get my head around, because I was like, I've succeeded and I'm a woman and I've got this promotion and it's amazing, and I'm being told that I only got it because I'm a woman. And it was infuriating, actually. And when I think back to it, I now, and it's almost kind of comical but infuriating at the same time. So that was my personal experience with my gender being an actual topic of why, or a reason why I got a job, and not based on my skill set, just because he thought that it was because there was other women in the office. So it really disregarded my ability as a person, why I got it.
Yeah. Which I suppose also then leads into imposter syndrome slightly in its head for you, because if you were of a different nature, you might believe that, or you might second guess yourself, and it's like, well, how do you win?
Yeah. And also kind of that feeling of feeling like I had to prove myself that I was good enough for that role, and it wasn't just because I was a woman, or I was favorited because I was a woman. Very bizarre situation.
I find it really interesting that, to me, the theme that comes out of what both of you have said so far is that sort of no matter what age or stage you're at, or whether things are going your way or not, it does almost feel like you can't win in a lot of scenarios. And obviously, in this discussion, we want to look at the positives too, not just the negatives. But I find that really interesting that, you know, if age is an issue, it's not just that a particular age is an issue. It's that there's issues all along the spectrum. So I just I want to touch on, we mentioned, you know, gender pay gap and female quota. Just really briefly, have you guys heard anything back from the people that you've spoken to so far about those?
I don't actually, positively or not, again, I won't keep putting my disclaimer out there that this is just a small subset of women. But pay gap, not so much actually. I think it was more pay in general, and conservation is not the best. In terms of either directly known or maybe the information just wasn't out there, I don't think the pay gap in certain roles was raising its head. And then the gender quota was kind of this when we started talking about your situation, Laura, almost like it's a positive thing, and we understand why everyone takes the step to say we want, you know, X amount, 50% of the workforce to be a woman or female, and then you hire a load of women, and in the back of their head are they thinking, well, is it just because I was a woman? And then does it breed, I've overheard, not in this industry, but engineering, from friends, slightly bitter conversation about female engineers and, well, they're coming and taking our jobs and all this kind of stuff. And I think the conversation can quickly switch to well-intentioned to the idea of, well, it's just because you're a woman, and then it's almost pointless having the thing in the first place because it declassifies and sort of disregards all your skills and abilities and centers just around your gender, which is what they were trying to get away from in the first place almost. So it's tricky.
Yeah. It would be interesting if anyone wanted to put in the chat about if they've personally been affected by the pay gap in conservation, because it is something that we haven't actually had as much feedback on, I would say, Kirsty. A lot of our feedback has been how people are feeling about getting into the industry, or the imposter syndrome, which we'll come on to.
Yeah.
As from my experience in the conservation sector when I worked in it, I didn't notice there was a pay gap unless it, like you said, the information just wasn't there yet to see.
Actually, one thing I would say is when it comes to negotiating, if we move up into mid-level and beyond senior conservation roles, when you can negotiate your own salary, or the band is between, you know, 30 to 40 grand, whatever, women tend to negotiate a fair price, and men tend to go for the maximum. That's obviously a generalization, but you know, something that we wanted to talk about later on as well. With our own platform is like things about getting into interviews in the first place, and how to ask for a pay rise and why, and how to sort of set it out in a really kind of concise, professional way. That's a topic for another day. But when we talk about pay gap, something that springs to mind is if you are ever, because I've applied for jobs in the past where the salary's not disclosed, and you have to put in what you earned at your last job. And I always think, nah, that just seems to me, why, I don't know, that gets me a little bit. Especially if you're moving between early career to mid, and you state your kind of lower level salary, which does that deem you then not worthy of, I don't know, the higher end of the salary? And again, it's all about responsibility and X, Y, and Z, but that's the only thing that I can think of is when you negotiate your own salary, maybe negotiate it higher.
Yeah. That's I think a really good point. It's a question that we hear a lot about also, is that sort of salary negotiation and how to navigate that. And it's worth bearing in mind that might be slightly different for women and men, personality wise or experience wise, or for various reasons. So if you guys had to sort of, you know, from the feedback that you've heard and the discussions you've had, if you had to pick the one issue that you felt was biggest in terms of women trying to balance their careers in conservation with family life, what would that be? I touched on a couple of minutes ago, Laura, but
yeah, I think you touched upon it, Kirsty, the charity sector, and the fact that a lot of conservation jobs, if in the sector, when we think of conservation jobs, is that they can be in the conservation, the charity sector, so there won't be as much funding and help. But I think in terms of if you're wanting to go on maternity leave, things like this, it can be very different depending on where you work. I don't know if you'd agree, Kirsty, with that statement.
Yeah, the conditions vary massively. So it would be hard to kind of try and quantify them. But I think just the issue of the leave, the break in itself, taking the time off, and then down the line, the return seems to be, I imagine, you know, it's daunting in a sense wherever you work, but almost it feels like the return to something that's different than it was a year ago. We've already switched it up. We've already moved on. You know, the environmental issues are changing all the time. So it's like a double-edged. There's a kind of a double impact of, first of all, taking a year off or whatever, and then trying to come back in and feeling like, whoa, I'm way out of my depth.
On a positive note, though, I when I got that promotion that I spoke about, that was actually for a maternity cover, and I was more than happy to be doing that for a year. And then the person I was covering for did come back, and she was back into the role, and the role had changed slightly, but it was very adaptable for her to get back into it. So that's a positive that I've seen, and that was in a charity sector as well. So bringing it back to a positive, there are things out there for.
Yeah. I was going to say something I came across. I was trying to check if it was passed in law yet, but it seems like it's going through a second. So in the UK, there's a environmental employment bill about flexible working, so that it's going through its second phase to try and pass into law that every employer has to offer flexible options. So either part-time, condensed hours, a standard, unless you can prove a good reason otherwise. So that would make a massive difference. And also a few companies have tried to, like, at the recruitment stage, to try and get women into these, into conservation in general, but particularly into more senior roles, to try and take away the use of gendered language in job descriptions and when you write your person spec. So I think it was like the most commonly used masculine associated words, kind of determined and strong, logical, whether you agree or not, they kind of like picked out that these words were most associated, and things like interpersonal, caring, compassion, passion were associated as being feminine traits. So if we tried to remove all that and just write a very sort of non-gendered base, just straight to the point job description. I think it was Zurich, like the insurance firm Zurich, tried it for a year and had a 20% increase in the amount of women applying in the first instance for senior positions. So is language even subconsciously a barrier? Oh, and one thing which is not on maternity, but we wanted to get in there, was how much we felt that men tend to overlook the essential criteria, or even the desirables, especially when you're applying for a job, whereas women fixate on maybe the one essential thing that you don't have and you don't apply. Just kind of across the board, maybe just being a bit more conscientious and literal, rather than pulling your skill sets and saying, well, no, I don't have that, but this is what I do have. Just being a bit more, I don't know what the word is. Yeah.
But recognizing that none of us is perfect.
Yes, exactly.
It's ordinarily rare that someone's going to hit all of the essential and desirable criteria if they're applying for a job, whether they're man or woman.
And going for it anyway. Victoria's just put about a pay related story, and she was saying how on one of her first jobs, she was just out of college or out of school, and she went for they asked how much she'd want, and she said that she went for a lower salary. It's interesting because I think someone's at the beginning said that there's poor career advice, so maybe that's what needs to be looked at, is some really strong, going back to the wording of CVs or covering letters, and how to pitch how much you want from a job, even when you're fresh out of school, fresh out of college. Maybe that is something that needs to be talked about. All of these things seem to be linking up. So thank you, Victoria, for sharing that, because it seems to be linking in with everything we're saying, I would say.
Yeah, thanks so much for that comment. It's something that we've heard a lot from our audience too at Conservation Careers. So that's really, really good to know that there's a gap there. So I want to shift gears a little bit here, because I want us to be able to spend some time on imposter syndrome and self-sabotage. I think that's really important, and I think everyone here, women and probably men too, are interested in this topic. So I'm going to launch another poll just to get us started on this part of the discussion. Just bear with me a second here. If it lets me. Well, while I'm getting the poll launched here, Kirsty and Laura, do you mind just starting by talking about, what is imposter syndrome and self-sabotage, and what do they look like in practice? That would be a great start.
Yeah, we're both like, yeah, let's tell you all about it. It was interesting because before we started, we were talking about how imposter syndrome, the actual term, I'd never really heard of until maybe a year ago, and I was like, oh my goodness, I definitely have suffered from that. For me, I mean, it might be for slightly different for everyone, but for me, it feels like you're in a job role, or you're in a situation and you feel like you shouldn't be there, or you feel like you're going to get found out, that you're not actually meant to be doing this job, you haven't got the qualifications, you haven't got the skill set, you've got it by chance, or it's been by fluke, and someone's going to find you out and you're never going to be good enough. That's how I describe it.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I don't know if you want to say, like, I don't know if people are already filling in the poll, Kirsty, is that?
Yeah, I'm going to share the results here.
Yeah.
Basically confirm that it's fairly ubiquitous.
I wonder if the not sure people are like, oh, now that I've heard Laura say that, probably yes.
Yeah, I actually intended to launch the poll before getting you to explain, but
no.
That's interesting. Do you know, I'd be really keen to, well, if you want to stay anonymous, that's fine. If you haven't, I think that's really interesting. If you want to share, like, why you haven't, or just, I don't know, your experience. They always interest me. I envy you. Yeah. Well done, you. Yeah, so, I think.
Oh, sorry, Kirsty, I cut you off. Go on. I was just going to ask, do you feel like this is an issue that particularly or especially affects women, and why?
Yeah. So I think it probably links to this intrinsic sort of lack of visibility of role models, or lack of visibility of people like you, and the people like you might be a woman of a certain age, colour, with or without disability, or it might just be a lack of a woman in a role. And I think so you're more likely to experience imposter syndrome if sort of systematically you've been directly or indirectly told by the lack of visibility, like, this isn't for you and this is not where you should really be. And I think it bleeds in really subconscious ways. Even just, I can't remember the big experiment, they asked like 1,000 school children to draw a cook and a this and a that and a scientist, and they all drew like the crazy professor and stuff. And that could just be, I know that's not really a serious point, but the point is still there. Like, what job roles do we assign which gender to, almost? And we definitely still do it. The joke about the pilot crashing, I can't remember. But yeah, I think it's definitely still there. And I think it affects women more because of the lack of visibility and a really long-standing narrative in society that we are lesser, and no matter how much progress is made, we still know that we have so far to go.
Yeah.
I think it's just slightly more likely to impact women, obviously never taken away from the fact that it can impact anyone at any time. But I think that that's definitely an issue.
Yeah, it's really important to say that it's not just women that feel it. I think every human has the capacity to feel it, but I do think there are a lot of rooted this is a rooted issue in the female psyche. Just it's something that's come up a lot in our events that we've done, even when the topic isn't on imposter syndrome or the idea of self-sabotage. It's something that's come up, and it's just sort of things have been like, oh, I feel like I'm not doing enough, and I feel like I'm not good enough to do this, or I don't belong on this. And these tiny little words that I think play in our minds. And again, it's men experience it as well, but it's interesting that a lot of the women that we've spoken to, majority of them have felt it. So I would say it's a strong strong feeling for a lot of people.
I just want to say, when Connor just said, like, could you expand on what you mean by visibility? I think even taking it right back to, we said something about lack of poor career advice or something like that. Even if you think back to being at school, and there could just be a comment on careers in general at that stage, but there was no there was no conservation offered in any way. You could be a vet or a marine biologist, really, and that was about it. But the people would come in and they would speak to you and they would show you videos, and you would go on visits here, there and everywhere. And I just felt it was very, very excluded. And if it was, it tended to be a male scientist of some description. And I feel like we're getting a lot better with visibility on TV and things, but there's still, I think it's like 5 times as many men as women to be invited on as experts to speak in their field, to speak on panel shows, to be interviewed on the radio, to write a column in a newspaper. We're not saying that women don't do that, of course they do, but I think when you look at it as a whole, there's just still some very subtle differences. Academia, women less kind of either knocked off as a co-author, or papers less likely to be read. Yeah, I think that's what I mean by visibility, is seeing what you're doing, going after it in subtle ways. But we know there's massive progress being made, so I feel like I'm talking about it like we're still stuck in an age. I've no doubt we've moved on, but I think
it's almost that it's seeing that progression, isn't it? Like, there are definitely still those issues around, but it, like you said, it is getting better. There's more talks like this, for example, people being able to say how they feel and raise the questions where maybe this wouldn't have happened a few years ago, and maybe it will continue to happen and there'll be more visibility, like you said, Kirsty. So
yeah,
I think something that you sorry, just kind of the fact that we have to celebrate women in science and girls in science shows that there's still an issue. I think that's a really good point that you said.
Yeah, and the UNESCO days in particular are great, and they're really well attended and celebrated, and they represent huge things. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have celebratory events, because I think the theme this year was women in the fight against COVID and the contribution that they'd made. I went to the live stream, it was really interesting. But I think just when we can get to the level that it's people in science and there's no specific pool, then we'll know that we've kind of done it. But I don't think days are a bad thing in general. But I think one thing just to say is, if you do feel imposter syndrome, one thing that we're trying to do with our platform, which maybe comes across today, maybe it doesn't, we try and be super relaxed and just very open. And we want to put the message across that talking about something doesn't make you lesser or more of or a weaker competitor or a weaker candidate. And if you and another woman sit and say to each other, we're both kind of feeling this, it doesn't pit you against each other. And we're going to talk about women as allies and not competitors, but it's a competitive industry. That doesn't mean that you need to be in competition. Does that make sense? I think we've had chats, and some of them we limit the sort of the places. So there's maybe 20 of us having a chat. We've never met each other before. And so just to get that weight off your shoulders of not having to walk into the room and wear your job title on your sleeve and say, I do this, I'm qualified in this. Like, we just want you to drop it, be able to drop it and just say, do you know what? I don't feel that confident in this area, but I feel really confident in that one. Anybody feel the same? Cool, yeah, me too. No shame in it. Like, it's not a weak thing to own it, you know?
It's interesting, as you were saying that, Jess just put about how because she had a female boss in environmental science and conservation sector, and there was senior positions. Sorry, I'm reading this quite quickly. So I think the idea is that because there's not as many women in the senior positions, that it can be a bit dog eat dog. But that's what we're trying to dispel, really. It's the fact that we all need to boost each other, and it doesn't have to be like that. But I do think you're right, Jess, there's kind of that feeling that because there's less women in those senior positions, that it is a bit of a fight. But I'm hoping that we can get away from that and encourage people to be working together rather than working against each other.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say to Jess White as well, I agree with this 10 million%, even when I'm speaking to my husband about this. We have, if you want to chat, like we do have specific women themed events, but our monthly chat, which is just where you can come into the room and just get it out all on the table, that's for everyone, absolutely everyone. And the things that you pick up and learn from each other are the most beneficial. Because I know what you mean. I totally get it. As women sitting and talking about the issues and in a closed group where sometimes we're looking for answers from other people as well. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Yeah, I don't know how we do it either, but I'm just saying I agree with you.
I think that's what we want to get across, isn't it? That everybody is welcome to our platform. So if you guys, anyone listening now wants to join in with our discussions, and please, because we want to learn from you guys too. We want to know everything that's going on. We like learning from everyone too. Yeah.
And just to say, sorry, Kirsty, I know you want to move on to the last point, and I do too. I'm sorry, just last thing is that the second biggest focus is on whether you work and you have a job in conservation or not, because that was the most frustrating for me. I felt like it was a closed network and I was standing on the outside banging on the door and no one was looking at me. So if it's your hobby, if you're interested in it, if you're studying it, if you used to work in it, if you want to work in it, conservation is not a job. Well, it is a job title, but you can all be a conservationist in different ways, blah, blah, blah. Okay, sorry.
No, great. What I'm thinking is we should have allotted an hour and a half for this. It's a big discussion. Yeah. I do want to ask Kirsty and Laura, are you guys okay to stick around an extra 5 minutes or so?
Of course.
Okay. Yeah. So what we might do is just extend the discussion a tiny bit so that we do have time to answer questions and get through everything. If anyone has to leave right at past, then obviously we're going to be recording this too, and we'll share that to have full access, and you can come back and watch all of it if you missed a little bit. But I just wanted to ask here in the topic of imposter syndrome, how might that cause women and or men to get in their own way? I think you guys mentioned some things like perfectionism and procrastination and some other words. Could you just mention really briefly what that might look like?
Yeah, so sorry, Kirsty, I'm jumping in on this.
No,
I feel like I've really experienced it. I would say my personal experience of it's really held me back because you don't believe that you can do the job, and therefore your performance is lesser than if you were confident in yourself. So I think you can work yourself up into a bit of a frenzy of being like, I just can't do this. I'm not meant to be doing this. Why am I doing this? And then it stops you. That can also stop you from applying for other jobs. So if something came up and you're like, I can kind of do that. And like we were saying, with not the essential criteria, you might not have everything. That imposter syndrome can stop you. If you look down that list and there's one thing you can't do, you go, no, I can't do that. Because that imposter syndrome saying you're going to feel like this again, you're going to have that one thing that you're not going to have that one thing and you won't be able to do it. So I think that's where it can really hold people back, is it almost convinces you that you can't do it when you can, because you are doing it, if that makes sense. So it's believing that you're where you are at the moment, you're doing it, you've been trusted to do it, and you can do it. It's just you are holding yourself back. If you can't do it, someone's going to tell you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's when it's probably not imposter syndrome and you just can't do it. I think one thing I was told a while back was we do like disqualifying the positive. So you fixate on something that you're not confident about in your job, or you feel like, oh, I didn't do that as well. Maybe you did get a slightly more negative piece of feedback, but for some reason it's just compounded, and then you're more likely to disqualify all the positives. So some advice that was given was to just check the imposter syndrome, just note down, if even in the small wins in your role or your studies or whatever you're doing, note down all the small wins during the week, note down the failures, however you perceive them, and the wins will always outweigh the failures, and that way you can start bringing the positives back into perspective. And just keeping a little, and I did do it for a while and it does work, just really quickly just scribbling down, that was good, that was a positive, that was a win, yeah, and then you can see it, because you just forget. Everyone forgets at the end of the day, and all you remember is the overriding feeling of I'm not quite sure if I'm good enough, but you have no proof. So make proof, and then
Love it.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And something going back slightly to what I was saying about everyone being able to be a conservationist, and Kirsty, you touched on that too. I think what I found was, because I decided to leave the conservation sector as an industry, but then go my own way. It's kind of using your skill set and noting down, like you said, what you're really good at, and tailoring that into jobs that are still doing good in that sector, but in maybe a slightly different way. So working on your strengths, and everyone's got negatives and can't do some things. That's why we're all so different, and we all work as a team. So seeing your strengths rather than what you perceive as your weaknesses can get that imposter syndrome out of your head.
Yeah, I'm just typing in that we are planning what we're calling our satellite careers series. So we really are still planning it. So I think it's probably at the end of every month we're going to hear from a guest that works in conservation and the environmental sustainability sector in some way. So for example, someone in a comms role, communications is like vital. If you don't have comms, you don't have conservation almost. So if you came from a marketing and a PR background, how can you use that? Social media roles, we're going to hear from the sustainability kind of developer at Lego. So how do you make your product, if you work in product design, more sustainable? We're going to hear from some podcasters. We're calling it satellite careers. It's maybe not the role, but you know, stomping about and doing the field work isn't for everyone. And I think it took me a while to get my head around. I'm not going to be the person with the tracker thing in the Jeep in the desert, unfortunately, as much as I'd love it. Life has taken me this way, and I've picked up skills along the way that make me more suitable for that over there. Much, you know, so I think just conservation is multifaceted, and you can fit in taking previous skills with you.
Yeah. And thinking we don't have to do everything, we can do enough that satisfies us, and knowing that we are helping whilst we do that as well.
Yeah. Which I think those are such important points. We also just did some research and published some guides showing, you know, the wealth of jobs out there, but also the need for people that come from different backgrounds in conservation. Yeah. Huge. And a lot of people don't recognize that. Yeah. So, and we're going to be sharing all sorts of resources with you guys after this too. So you can delve in more detail, and you can find stuff that'll support you. So because of the time, I think what we're going to do is I just want to finish our discussion talking about, you know, opportunities for women in conservation, opportunities to find role models, leadership or mentorship, and then we're going to turn it over to Q&A. And the topic of sort of unhealthy competition, that might come out in the Q&A anyways, I suspect. So okay. We'll see. And what is your comments on finding role models and mentorship?
Well, I was just going to ask, what is more helpful? Because I think I've got 6 links that are useful, and
put them all in
various platforms.
All of them.
Is it useful to link them in the chat, or is it or do you have a way? Are you going to send anything?
I'm going to share them with everyone after, so we're going to actually publish it on the website.
Okay, so
but you're welcome to put them in the chat now too. Okay. Yeah.
So there's no point. I'll just briefly. I was going to talk to you guys about a thing called the women's room. Which is, you can put yourself forward as, like I was talking about, as an expert in your field to talk on TV, radio, print. So journalists have access to the database, and they would type in, I don't know, COP26, let's come into Glasgow in November, and then they would find different female contributors. There's 4 mentoring platforms. I think mentoring is massive. And what was interesting was it the paper, I can't remember from earlier, where you said that someone was advised that women should have male mentors to help kind of further their career. I can't remember if it was a while ago in the chat. That was interesting. But I've got 4 platforms which are really solid and should hopefully be quite helpful. I think mentorship is the way to go. And a mentor doesn't have to be this official. Like, I realized when you look at the roots of kind of the word mentor, even I've been mentored my whole life, I just haven't known it. Like, you know, that person or that woman you maybe that pops into your head when you think about how would they do it, or what would they do, or how did they do that. I kind of have a few of those figures, and I think it's good to have someone that you look up to, and it's good to, if there is someone like that in your organization, that you admire, or you think, you know, for whatever reason, I would reach out to them. It doesn't have to be this official thing. It could just be something you check in with. Yeah, I met an ecologist really early on. Her name was Rachel. She was just amazing. She was doing her thing. And I've told Rachel this, it was meeting her. I worked with her for like 3 weeks doing some field surveys. And I was like, yeah, I want to be you for a whole variety of reasons. But she was very inspiring. She's very down to earth. And she was right there in front of me. And I was like, yes, you know, I really admire you, love what you do, and I want to do it too. So yeah.
Thanks for that. Okay, well, we could go for another, you guys could go for another hour or 2 or 3. But I want to give everyone who's joined us an opportunity to ask questions. We've already got a lineup of about 10 questions in the Q&A. And hopefully you guys should be able to upvote questions. But I'm going to start at the beginning here. And we'll do our best to get through as many as we can. So the first question is from Holly. I recently saw a job that said something like, must be fit enough to carry out the role. It wasn't an overly physical role. Discrimination against people with disabilities and hidden disabilities are a worry. Have you guys witnessed this as a barrier also?
I think thinking about my own job roles and careers and where I've worked, certain roles, there was no outright discrimination, but there was no provision made to, I think if you applied with a hidden or non-hidden disability, it was certainly if you applied with a very visible disability, you'd probably be, but I'm not even sure they would recognise that as discrimination. They'd probably say, well, we've always driven that for before, well, that's the way we do it. So I'm not sure there's provision enough for the sort of foresight to ever sit down and reorganise a job role so that it might be. And there probably are certain aspects of certain jobs that need to be done in a certain way, and that's fine. But I think on the whole, it's just, yeah, this is the way it's always been done. And not really updating the perspective.
Yeah, I would agree. I haven't really witnessed that before, but it does sound like if they've put that in the job description, it sounds like that it's almost like they've set that particular job to have that criteria. Which is sad.
It feels quite, if you're saying it's not a particularly physical role, that feels like a very underhand way of, do you know what I mean? Like, must be physically fit enough to do what? That sounds quite, yeah.
Okay, thanks guys. Just a comment here. There's a couple really long questions, so I'm going to skip over those just because of time. But like Kirsty and Laura mentioned, there's other platforms where you can go and you can ask questions and get support. So we've got a question here. Do you think application processes and potential inequality associated with this would benefit from a more anonymous approach?
Yeah, there's the whole, I won't go into the whole John versus Jennifer debate. It was basically a similar, or a carbon copy application with the name John and Jennifer, and the Johns were more favoured, and quite, and I'm not sure that's quite an outdated concept now. I'm not sure, potentially. I think even when you do get into the room, certain that the factor of like, oh, a woman of a certain age, I don't think that'll ever go away. I think people are always conscious of, what are you about to do? Are you going to run off and get married? Are you going to go having kids? I've had really throwaway comments that kind of worried me at the time. Don't you go off and get pregnant then? Ha ha ha. But like, that's not ha 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 to me. It really, I think, why? What are you going to do? Are you going to fire me? Like, what, you know? The kind of jovial nature towards it. My friend got hired in a place. My friend looked exceptionally young, and she made the comment about a television show, and someone said, do you remember that? And she said, yes, I'm 29. And they were like, oh, I don't think if we'd known that we would have hired you. I don't think the boss would have agreed to that. And you know, that was a couple of years back, and all these kinds of things. Can't even remember the original question. I'm not sure. What do you think, Laura?
I think it would be interesting if there was more of an anonymous way of applying, because that would then rule out all kinds of discrimination, right?
Yeah.
So it might be interesting.
I don't think it would cause any harm for sure. Yeah, I think it would level the playing field slightly.
Just got a comment here from someone saying that she was asked whether she planned to have children as part of the application process. Another example.
I mean, we know that you know, these things aren't allowed, but how do you police it? You know, especially if you're a smaller organization, that might really be a concern to you. You know, there's 5 people that work here. Am I going to hire you and you're going to leave? But that's not your problem. Yeah.
So you guys have kind of touched on this already, but great question from Evie. I hope I'm saying that right. What would be your top tips for avoiding imposter syndrome? If it's possible to avoid.
I don't think you can avoid it.
I was going to say.
Yeah, it's your, oh my god, we could get all psychological, I suppose, couldn't we? It's your brain's going to overpower your rational thinking in the first instance, so you probably have to sit with it and give it a name. This is imposter syndrome. This is not rational thought. Get the pen and paper out, and I think and try and just rationalize it, write it down, or even just write down exactly how you're feeling and accept it and say, you know, you could accept it on that evening or whenever it comes and say, well, I feel this way, that's fine. I don't think I'm good enough at X, Y, and Z. I feel a bit nervous at work. Then the next day, come back and review it with fresh eyes. And just, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And when you said about catching it, we actually did a whole event on imposter syndrome and burnout, and we had a counsellor who came on. I think we might do something similar to that again, because it's a topic that's always comes up. And she was saying how catching it. So now if some of you listening to this hadn't really realised that's what imposter syndrome was, and you have those things of those thoughts of like, oh, I don't think I should be here, or I'm not good enough, then hopefully now that you know what it is and recognizing it, you can catch it and you can think, you know what, maybe that's imposter syndrome. Maybe having those thoughts that Kirsty and Laura were talking about, let's just write them down, let's leave them there, and let's look at my strengths, so you can counteract them with your strengths and see what you are good at.
That's actually exactly what I was going to say. If you think I'm not good enough, or I feel out of my depth here, I'd write down literally, I feel out of my depth because, and then write it out, and then in the next column write proof for this fact over here. And if you can't find concrete proof for it, it's probably imposter syndrome. I just try and get signs.
And also kind of saying, okay, maybe I don't feel like I belong here, however I am here at the moment, so let's see what I can do whilst I'm here, you know. Kind of telling yourself that you are where you're meant to be. It's easier said than done sat here when you're not thinking it, but catching it and almost answering it back is a little bit.
But to say that both Laura, well, I'm speaking for you, like before we came on to talk to hundreds of people, we were like, should we be talking to hundreds of people? Like that fleeting thought goes through your mind. We're like, why, what qualifies us or whatever, but we hope we can help, but we suffer it too. Everybody does. I
think based on the comments I'm seeing here, you guys are already helping lots. Okay, so let's do say 2 or 3 more questions. We've got a question here from Chantel. Someone's asked if there are many women of African and Caribbean heritage in the UK conservation sector, and if not, why not? And what initiatives are there to encourage them into conservation? I don't know if that's something that you guys have any experience with, or feel you could answer.
I would say in my own current situation, especially in Scotland, no, not so many. Or even going to conferences or partnering with organisations and organising large events or getting around the boardroom table. Yeah, there's a distinct lack. And I feel I work a lot with colleagues in London, and the London offices, it feels slightly better represented. But then still overall within the whole company, no, I don't think so. And so I can speak for the company and for the colleagues and the partners that I have and say no. And why, I think it's not just conservation specific, but I do think we're getting better. And I know within certain organizations, like my own organization has a kind of making a concerted effort, even just to raise the profile of visibility of the women that are here doing the job, and trying to raise that profile to other women. But I don't think it's conservation specific. I do think we're getting slightly better at it, but I do think there's a massive way to go. And there are so many people that I could name check specifically from social media, from the outreach work that they're doing at the minute, that I think they are trailblazing and leading the way. And I think it's only going to be to a positive benefit if we start getting behind it. But I think the problem, even just like within the hiring phase, or even the advertisements for putting the adverts out for the job to the communities, to different networks in the first place, I think something has to change at that level, and then it has to filter down through the organisation.
Yeah, and like we were saying before about getting those role models and seeing people that you can identify with in these higher positions or in these sectors. I think it'd be really interesting to, I mean, this is something where we could take our platform, Kirsty, but even going into schools and showing how conservation can be so diverse and everyone's important. That would be something I think we'd be quite interested in, and we'd absolutely love everyone's feedback from it as well. So yeah, we're always searching for ideas and what maybe other people think are the barriers as well.
I'm just trying to find, I was going to mention the British Ecological Society Network, and I don't know if you guys, I'm just going to try and type it in here, flocktogether.world. The Flock Together community are doing amazing things as well at the minute. And I think also to bear in mind from a workshop that we had before, was because women of specific heritage tend to be fewer, then you're also heaping on a little bit more pressure, being like, well, you're doing it, so you're our spokesperson, go speak. And it's like, well, no, that's not their responsibility as well, which was something to take on board. Was just because there's less people, then you give them more responsibility to go to speak for themselves and be a role model in themselves, which is no bad thing, but it can't just fall to that person because you decide that they need to then speak for themselves. I think we all need to play a bigger part.
Yeah.
Right. I just wanted to add on to that comment that this is looking beyond the UK, but we do see in all the jobs that we monitor around the world, a lot more actual specific positions created to increase diversity and inclusion in the conservation and the environmental sector. So there's a very active movement by a lot of organizations who are either hiring, early career conservationists, or they're training them. Whether that's at a university institution or something else. So there are a lot of really, really positive initiatives out there from around the world. Obviously, it's not enough, it's a start. But that movement has increased actually since COVID hit.
I have some links as well for the resources that you send out about a specific training scheme as well, which is quite good. Perfect. Something we talk about a lot is affordable training as well. A topic for another day. But
yes, big topic.
Yeah. Volunteer,
an important one.
So, but you need to work at the same time, and no, you've got no money. Oh well, shame, not for you. So we want to, and I'm always on the lookout. Just to say, in our monthly update, we try and take feedback from the community and say right, what do you want to hear about, and then we go and we squirrel away and try and find those specific opportunities, so that we're not just tarring everyone with the same brush. We try and find quite niche opportunities out there.
Yeah. Great. Well, I think on that note, I'd love to end just by asking you if you're probably going to share many, but a few top resources that you might point people to and where they can go if they want to get in touch with you. That would be fantastic.
Shall I do I'll put our plug in one last time.
Yes, please.
So that's our Instagram. And we like talking to people. We'd talk to you all day long if we could. Do not hesitate to send us an email at this address with your question or your thoughts, queries, problems. We'll get back to you. What is it again, Laura? Another thing, info@gmail.com. And we really mean that. This is not a closed shop. I know some of you have kind of reached out on LinkedIn and things like that. Love that. Keep it coming. I was so lost when I tried to switch from being in the arts to science. I thought everybody was so advanced and they had all these fancy degrees, and why would they ever want to talk to me? I'm just a person that sits on my couch and watches TV at night like everyone else. So yeah. Oh no, why can't people see the links? Is it something I'm doing? Oh, hold on. I've changed it to all panelists.
Everyone versus a specific person. It could be that.
I'll try that now. So there's the two again. And finally, our website is here. And then if you go to the website and click keep in the loop, then we can send you the newsletter, which is the best way for us to keep in touch. And my top resource is either Women in Nature Network, who have a mentoring platform, and I'm not going to talk you through the website. Get on that one. That one's great. The Women's Room is coming at you. This is where you can put yourself forward as an expert for your area. And British Ecological Society has loads of working groups and platforms, but they also have alongside the, oh no, why can't I find you? There we go. Alongside the BME group, they have a Women in Ecology mentoring scheme, which is open worldwide.
Fantastic.
Sorry.
Don't worry if you're listening right now, if you're watching and you haven't caught all of the million links that we've shared, we're going to share them all after this. So everyone's going to have access, whether you're here right now or whether you missed the webinar and you're catching up later. Great. So I want to end with one last poll, and it's really a question to you guys who are here, on Zoom, about what topics you might want to see in future. You know, either from Conservation Careers or And Another Thing, or both. So the question is, you know, what topics would you like to hear more about? And options are Imposter Syndrome and Self-Sabotage, women in conservation in general, women in conservation, you know, more focused on cultural barriers, because we haven't touched on that much today, or other, and feel free to type in the comments. So thanks for answering that. I'll just give you a minute. Here at Conservation Careers, we run a webinar every month. So we love hearing from you also about what are your most pressing questions and issues, and what do you want to hear about? And I just want to say an enormous thank you to everyone who's joined today, who's been here from all over the world. Thank you so much, Kirsty and Laura, for being here and sharing all of your extremely valuable advice and insight. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you so much. I'm just scrolling through the questions. I'm feeling, yeah, my goodness, Sarah is saying like she feels like she's banging on the door of an exclusive club. That was me. Yeah, definitely send us an email if we haven't answered your questions.
Perfect. All right. So I've just shared the results of the poll there too, so everyone can see. It looks like sort of the top topic is women in conservation in general, followed by imposter syndrome and self-sabotage, followed by sort of cultural barriers in particular. And thanks for reading out the chat there. All right. Well, thank you again, everyone. Thanks for sticking around as we ran over by about 15 minutes, but I think it's worth it because it's been a really important discussion, and it's probably just the beginning of a much bigger discussion. So thanks for being a part of it. And again, Kirsty and Laura, it's been amazing having you here. Thanks so much for sharing your knowledge and your experience in a really, you know, comfortable, accessible way too, I think.
Yeah, thank you. No, thank you. We've absolutely loved it. And this is what we're all about. We just get really excited when we bring people together and we hear the same sort of themes come up, because then we're like, oh, hey, we're going to crack this together. Exactly. Mission, so we love it.
Yeah. It's yeah, I like that point to end on, is it's not something that you're dealing with on your own, it's together. We're all in it together. So on that note, thanks so much, everyone. Take care, stay safe, and you'll hear from us all again soon. All right.
Bye.
Bye for now.